Okay, before I go to the next session, I wanted to do one session in between, and this is going to be Candid Cinematography Adda 08. And I won't say that this is where Candid Art Adda is meeting your Candid Cinematography Adda. I'm not saying that, but you will see that if you understand Candid Art Adda or whatever we are talking about there, then you can find parallels, you can learn a lot, and that is what you should do, in fact. But whenever we are talking about cinematography, we are talking about camera lenses very specifically, what is the kind of lens, what kind of like situation it was, the type of lighting, whether you are shooting in available light or whether you are doing a setup. So we have talked about all these things, whether you are using a fast lens or you are using like more t-stop or f-stop, but those are different things. For cine lenses we are using t-stops, transmission stops, and for DSLRs or cameras we are using f-stops, and t-stops are obviously much better and more accurate. So there are differences as well, but few things I wanted to mention. If you have a DSLR, if you have a phone, you have a camera. So using that camera, I want you to make a movie. So in the information age, what happens is who used what lens, this becomes so important. And this is part of your knowledge gathering. This is part of your information gathering, who used what. But what you should go for is the intended effect. In this information age, we forget what was the intended effect, why it was used, who used what, that is there, that's fine, we need to know that, but why it was used and what was the intended effect for using that lens. These are the things we are talking about, because you have to understand one thing. Whenever we are discussing all these things, one of the most important reasons is you want to be a filmmaker, and you should become a filmmaker, or maybe somebody else is making a film and you are doing the cinematography, you are using your DSLR camera, maybe a compact camera you are having, point and shoot camera, you are using it for cinematography. You can do that, or maybe you are using phone, but you have the knowledge. So today what I will do is I will show you some paintings, some pictures, around 10 to 15 pictures I will show, and we will do appreciation of light too. Because when you are having a 3-point lighting setup, when you are having the studio lighting setup or the available light, or both, you are using both the lights, you have available light, apart from that you are using different lights, you are positioning them accordingly, you're having your diffuser, you're having your reflector and all these places. But why I mentioned it, I see a lot of people are buying reflectors, a lot of people are buying diffusers, a lot of people are buying this accessory, that accessory, they are using flash in a different direction. But what is the intended effect? What I am trying to achieve? What is the reason for using that particular thing? And being a practical filmmaker, that is so important. Otherwise what you will do is you will tell people that I have bought this, I have used this, I have used that, but whenever I am watching the film, it is either taking the audience away from filmmaking, or maybe it is getting in the way of filmmaking, or maybe we are not even understanding why the lens was used. But whenever you are going for that information, you will see that. And we used to study a lot of these things, and we have studied a lot of like things regarding cinematography, arts, painting, design, visual arts. So nowadays I see a lot more information is available. You have a lot of information available in the website, with different websites, and different people are sharing their opinions, many really good credible websites where they are sharing a lot of great information. But by doing, what you do is you achieve the intended effect, you play with those lenses, or maybe you are looking at the film or the frame, the particular shot, and you are going for the intended use of the effect, of the lens, and you are figuring out what lens was used. So we are talking about that, where you are using the lens and it is having a particular emotional feel or effect, how you are moving the camera, how you are using a mix of moves or maybe a mix of lights, and what effect we are achieving with regard to storytelling, so that is what we are talking about. And painting, photography, text, music, stage performance, I have already talked about. If you have any doubt, understand how it moves you, how it evokes an emotion in you, then through your cinematography or photography you are going to evoke that emotion or maybe something more than that in the audience. So understand those things. Inspiration from music, you can apply that in cinematography. Similarly, from literary medium, all these things you can do. Maybe if you ask someone very specifically, they won't be able to give you a particular answer which you like to listen to. In most of the cases, they won't. Sometimes they will avoid the question, sometimes they won't answer the question. But you will understand all these art forms, they are connected somehow. Now, we can do a lot of philosophical discussions regarding that, but I will keep it short today, and I will go through few things before moving on to the actual cinematography discussions, how it is used in storytelling, and few practical examples. But few things I want to mention, and you need to know that DOF, that is the depth of field, you have the aperture, you have the focal length, and you have the distance. How these things are affecting the depth of field. And let me just give you a brief. Whenever you are playing with depth of field, three ways you can achieve that. Depth of field, two types. You can have shallow depth of field, you can have deep depth of field. Now, when you are trying to achieve shallow depth of field, you can go for a wide aperture, that is a low f number. If you want to achieve a deep depth of field, you can go for high f number, that is a narrower aperture. And for the cine lenses, it is the T number, the transmission stops, T stop. If you are going for focal length, a long lens, a long focal length will give you a shallow depth of field. A long lens, a long focal length will give you a shallow depth of field. Wide lens, for the wide lens, it will give you the deep depth of field. And if you consider the distance, a short distance will give you shallow depth of field. A long distance or more distance, will give you deep depth of field. So three ways you can affect that. And light and shadow, though, we will talk about when we show the paintings. Leading lines, one of the most important things I mentioned in the last session, that directing the eye and how you are taking the eyes of the audience or the viewer to a particular place. For that, I will mention few terms. One is leading lines. You can create it by the objects, you can create it using light and shadow, you can create it using areas of color or texture, you can do that. And focal point, very important, focal point. And if I talk about balance, you can have formal and informal balance, you can have static or dynamic balance, and we have talked about the visual weight, so I am not talking about that again. You have the visual elements, you have composition, you have space and object, very important. Even if you consider a frame, there is a lot of space. It can be positive space, it can be negative space. Sometimes we are talking about headroom, we are talking about nose room, and one person is looking towards this side, one person is looking towards this side. And you will understand the relationship with continuity. If one person is moving from this direction to this direction, how you are maintaining that in the with regard to storytelling, continuity, creating a particular intended emotional effect. So for all these things, you will understand the relation of all these things. Then you have your perceptions, you have your illusions, and how you are playing with all these creative tools to tell a story. It can be resting, it can be suffocating, it can be a very static, balanced energy. You can achieve by choosing a particular focal length, choosing a particular position of the camera, keep it static. You can achieve all those things. And you can have a suffocating energy by changing few things. And what are the few things I have already mentioned? So you figure out and you play with them and you will achieve the intended effect. one of the examples being, I have talked about Dutch angle, and I have showed you Dutch angle and the intended effect. So where you are going to use it, you can do that. Slight imbalance, slight distortion, because if you are using anamorphic, you know that there will be slight distortion, but you are going for that aspect ratio, the intended effect, how you are going to like have that effect with regard to storytelling. That's why you are going for anamorphic. It can be a 40 or 50. You are going for that, but you know what you are using and why you are using it. Then, to obviously, we have this line, shapes and form, and all these visual elements. Then visual weight and texture. Texture is also very important. How you are playing with light and shadow, and you are having the textures. So when I show you the paintings today, you will see that it is not just a painting. There are people. Sometimes it's a landscape. It can be a group of people, or it can be portrait of one person. So we will observe light, and by looking at the gesture, we will look at acting too, right? So we will look at light and shadow. We will look at acting, because the gaze itself will teach you a lot about acting. That you can use for on-stage performances. You can use for on-camera performances, and you will look at it from the costume design or fashion design or dress design perspective too. Because whenever we are looking at the picture, we are not only looking at light and shadow, not only looking at the gesture or the acting, if there is any drama, if there is any acting involved, you will look at it because somebody else is doing that, and that particular painting was done. Now, the thing is, you have two ways, if it is a painting, if it is a design, or if it is a painting, we are creating it from scratch. So it can be our own observation, and we are recreating it, right? Sometimes you have seen people that one person is standing, one person is sitting, and we are recreating everything. We can change the lights if needed, or maybe we are observing, and whatever we are observing, we are putting it. Maybe we are adding a few dramatic elements to create the intended effect, but observation, and then your imagination too in action. So using color, brush, and the medium itself, we are using that painting. But for photography or cinematography, the light we already have. That is the available light, as I mentioned. Now, if you have a studio setup, you have very controlled lighting environment. You are choosing particular lighting, you are choosing everything. You are in control of that. And you can use a mix of both. You are having controlled lighting, you are having available light, as I mentioned before, to achieve the desired look. And how you can play with the aspect ratio along with the lenses, that also I have mentioned. But if I mention few things regarding the lenses, a prime lens is giving you a set focal length. That's a fixed focal length, FFL it is called. A zoom lens is giving you a variable focal length. Now, there is a relationship with focal length and angle of view or the field of view. So you can find charts where you can find the relationship with the relationship between field of view or the angle of view and the focal length. If you have more focal length, you have a narrower angle of view. So how it affects how much you are watching on screen, how much effect you are having emotionally, that is very important. And I have mentioned the necessity of using a particular lens, whether you are going for prime or you are going for zoom, or you are going for a parafocal lens which will stay in relative focus while the focal length of zoom lens is changed. You are changing the focal length, but it is in relative focus. You can use a varifocal lens or zoom. Sometimes with the movement and the zoom, you can achieve a like thrilling effect. We have it in Jaws, Hitchcock used it. So you can play with those things. You are moving as well as you are having the zoom lens simultaneously. That dramatic tension you can achieve. So 50mm, the nifty 50 lens I have talked about. very famous lens, and we use it, and you have seen me using it too in one of the sessions of Candid Cinematography Adda. If I go for wide angle, for a full frame sensor, it will be anything below 35 millimeter. Sometimes people are using like 14 to 12 14 to 22 millimeter, then 23 24 to 35 millimeter. These are the lenses, something in between, or maybe there is a prime. They are using all these things. Then long focus and long lenses, anything more than 55 millimeter for a full frame sensor. But for a long focus or for a long lens, we are actually compressing the background. So you will see the background is getting compressed. It is one of the signs how you understand that it is a telephoto lens or it's a long focus lens. You understand it, and depending on that, what is the focal length, you can understand that too. So it takes a lot of practice, but you can get there. And fisheye, I have already talked about. You are going less than 23 millimeter and less than 20 millimeter, and around that focal length, you are having the distortions of fisheye and how you are using that for your intended purpose. You can use macro lens if you are going for an insect or for something really small. Maybe a coin, maybe an insect. You can go for something really small, and you can use the macro lenses. For flowers, for leaves, you can go for that. And angle of view and focal length, this is one thing you should remember, and you will understand why anamorphic is giving you that particular effect, why zoom lens, when we are changing the focal length, it is giving you a particular effect. And the focal length is actually the distance between the lens and the digital sensor, the film plane. So the larger the focal length is, the narrower the angle of view, and less of the scene is visible. That's how it is affecting. Now you can understand the relationship, and accordingly you can choose the lens, and it will affect whatever is visible in the screen and how much distortion you are getting depending on that. And the widest aperture is actually the maximum aperture, and it will help you to shoot in low light. I have mentioned it. Sometimes you have a freeze action, like wider aperture, and you have that light coming in low light situation too. So sometimes how much blur you are expecting if you are going for still photography, how much blur you are expecting in the low light condition. Then sometimes you need a stabilizer like a tripod or something of the sort. So that atmosphere you are creating using lens, using light, using the people, the actors, and the people who are positioned in the frame, your characters, your actors, and you are creating the atmosphere. The light is creating it, the lens is creating it, because I mentioned last day, when you are doing it on stage, you are not focusing on all these things too much. But when you are making a movie, these things matter, because that is not happening on stage. You are shooting the movie for a few weeks or maybe few months, sometimes years. So you are choosing all these things deliberately. You want to have that intended effect, and then you are editing, you are having a movie. But for an on-stage performance, you are having a 2-hour or 3-hour performance, and everything is happening on that day, on that particular location. But in cinema, you are changing locations, you are going from this place to that place, you are shooting in different places, you are shooting in different ways, and after the principal photography is done, you are going for editing, and then you are putting things together, and you are having the movie. So you have a lot of things to play with. On stage performance, if something goes wrong, you cannot change it that day. But for a movie, if something goes wrong, you can go for a reshoot. You can talk to the cast members and they can stay late, or maybe they can go for a reshoot, because you need those scenes, and then you can edit it to have that particular dramatic effect. But that visceral thing, that is what we are talking about, that visceral experience, appreciation of light. So whenever I am showing you the pictures today, you will see that I am talking about appreciation of light. Now it can be in design, it can be in painting. In design, this is tricky, but in painting, especially in the earlier paintings, you will see that people have played with lighting a lot, light and shadow. So from that you can learn a lot, and according to your storytelling demand you can change it and you can play with it. So whenever you are looking at a painting or a picture, you can figure out the type of lenses used, and the aperture used, t-stop for cine lenses. I'm talking about t-stops, and the effect you had. Then your composition, how you compose the frame, and what movement you had in the particular scene, and light. So we are doing appreciation of light, so you have to look at light and shadow, the texture it is creating, the balance and the imbalance, chiaroscuro and all these things. But visual elements, if I talk about visual elements, focus, light, your highlights and shadow, line, repetition, shape, space, texture, value, all these things we are talking about. If I talk about composition, angle, background, balance, the central focus or the focal point, composition, contour, then contrast, your framing, setting, vantage point, all these things you can look at. And this visual weight, how it is. But most importantly, I will tell you, sometimes when you know that you are taking a picture based on feeling and it is evoking an emotion, and if you can recreate that, if you can move the audience with a particular emotion through your storytelling, it can be in one frame. When you take a picture, it can be a painting, it can be a frame in a movie or a particular scene. You are actually moving the audience the way you want to. So that is what you should learn. If you want to be a practical filmmaker, you can experiment with it. You can look at a lot of pictures, you can look at a lot of compositions, you can look at a lot of movies where people have used different things over the years, because many people have experimented in many ways. Sometimes you will see that one movie which is not that famous, but it can be technically very innovative. You will see that many people have used such innovative techniques. So you can learn from that as well, and for your storytelling demand you can use that. So there is no end of learning, and cinema is so vast, so you can always learn from still painting or still photography, or that costume acting, everything you can learn. So everything is connected, and we are talking about that. Now for the particular storytelling demand, how you are going to use it, that calls for your decision making, and that you need to develop for a practical filmmaking experience.